Hello and welcome to the APC Financial Review of 2019. So straight to the results for 2019. We made a modest surplus of £4,935, not quite as impressive as the £44,000 surplus we made in 2018 or indeed the £24,000 in 2017, but still way better than the £11,000 deficit that I was forecasting this time last year. Given an almost unbroken run of surpluses over the past 10 years, with just a very small deficit in 2013 to spoil the picture, we're now sitting on fairly sizable general reserves of just over £119,000. This is equivalent to just over 5 months of normal APC expenditure, providing us with a more than adequate buffer in case of any unexpected financial hiccups. Okay. Let's have a look now at our sources of income to try and understand why last year's surplus was so much less than 2018's. Part of the reason, as you can see from this table, is that the level of giving fell substantially in 2019 to the lowest level for several years. Our finances are driven by the money given by our congregation. It accounted for over 80% of total income last year. In 2018, if you remember, our giving was bolstered by a gift aid claim going back some 5 years that recovered an additional £9,000. This meant that underlying giving in 2018 actually fell by nearly £10,000, and it fell again in 2019 by about £5,000. And this graph simply illustrates the point. There was definitely a downward trend in our giving from December 18 to December 19. Looking a little more closely at our total giving income of £227,200, we can see that about £144,000 or 63% of this came from standing orders. £29,300 or around 13% came from plate giving, around £10,000, 4.5% from the envelope scheme, and the balance of £43,900 or 19.5% was from gift aid recovery. So this is an opportune moment to say a huge thank you to Chris Leng, who does a fantastic job looking after the gift aid submissions, not only for APC, but for the rest of the parish as well. Thank you, Chris. Looking now at other income, we can see that it was down a bit last year to just under £50,000, but it does continue to represent a decent chunk of our overall income, being around about 18% of the total. We'll now look a bit more closely at how other income is made up. Grant income was given by the Cooper and Jordan Trust and offset a proportion of Maxine's and Jenny's costs. Jenny joined the staff partway through 2019, hence the increase in associated grant income compared to 2018. Events and activities income fell from £7,700 to almost nothing, reflecting the fact that there was a church weekend away in 2018 but not in 2019. Trading income is principally generated by hire of the church centre, and last year we saw a bit of a drop from £26,000 to £22,400, but it nevertheless remains a considerable source of income. Fundraising income of £3,800 was generated from the winter ball and spring plant sale, and there were costs of £1,800 associated with generating this income. Fee income represents our share of wedding and funeral fees, with the balance being paid over to the diocese, and this showed another decrease last year, falling from £7,000 to £5,400. We'll now turn our attention to our expenditure. As usual, we allocated 10% of the previous year's unrestricted giving to be spent on mission giving, and we supported the work of Paul and Kathy, Hilary and Razor, Operation South America, the Hot House, Crassif Aid and St Peter's Church, spending a total of £27,400. Incidentally, the PCM has decided to increase our level of mission giving, which for 2020 will now be based on 12% of the prior year's unrestricted giving. Moving down, we spent £39,000 from general funds employing our team of lay workers. The costs included here relate to employment costs for Maxine, plus the costs associated with our intern Lucy until August, and then the cost of Jenny, who was employed as children and families worker from July last year. Parish share cost us £82,700, £3,000 less than in 2018, as Tynings Lane and St Thomas moved towards paying their share based on a more realistic cost of ministry model. And just a reminder that APC continues to overpay its parish share. The cost of ministry, not salary, let's not fall into that trap, last year was £57,843. So we effectively gave an additional £24,857 in mission giving. £7,500 of this was to support Tynings Lane to help pay for Jen's salary. The remaining £17,357 being available for the church's work across the wider diocese. Okay, returning to this slide and moving down the list, we can see that £39,600 was spent on general church expenditure. There are lots of different categories included in here, such as light and heat, which came in at £5,900, insurance £4,300, and repair costs of £15,800. The latter included £7,100 on AV upgrades and £2,300 on window repairs. A big thank you, as always, to our maintenance team, who ensure that the fabric of the church is maintained at really very little cost to the church family. We really appreciate the huge number of hours spent keeping the building spick and span. Expenditure on the church centre increased quite a lot, from £33,000 to £44,400, and Chris will cover this in a separate AGM presentation. Church activities fell from £14,400 to £5,600. In 2018 we had a church weekend away, and that accounted for almost £11,500 of the total spend. Obviously there was no such cost in 2019, but we did have costs in respect of the Alpha course, the marriage prep course, the Easter outreach, carers lunches and so on. Admin costs increased last year from £28,000 to £33,200. Jane and Luke were employed for the whole of 2019, so this contributed to part of the cost increase, and we also spent some money on computer upgrades. Overall then, expenditure in 2019 was a fair bit higher than in 2018, coming in at a little under £272,000. Looking very quickly at our restricted accounts, there's a small amount of activity happening in this parallel set of books. As you can see, there's not a huge amount of restricted income or expenditure nowadays, a little under £10,000 last year, but this extra source of income does enable us to bolster our mission giving. Included in giving for 2019 was support for Ruth Clay. We had money from the Wednesday worship services, regular giving for AWF and others, as well as one-off collections for Tear Fund, the Glebe Centre and Little Fishes. And out of restricted funds last year, we distributed £10,193 in grants, and among the recipients are those listed on this slide. Each year we subject our accounts, and indeed the accounts of the churches across the parish, to independent examination by our auditors, Whitehouse Ridsdale. This process has been delayed because of the pandemic, but is now well underway. So the accounts presented now are draft accounts, and it is possible the work of our auditors could result in minor changes to the numbers shown here. AGMs are an opportunity to take stock of the current year under review, but are also about setting out plans and goals for the year ahead. And I think the financial review should follow this pattern as well. So let's end with a quick look at what might lie in store for APC's finances for the remainder of 2020. Rather than show you the whole budget for 2020 line by line, I've chosen instead to pick out the key items that are likely to differ from 2019. Firstly, there's giving. Based on the run rate giving at the end of 2019, we were likely, at least before the pandemic intervened, to see a drop once again in the amounts given, estimated at around £9,000. On the expenditure side, there are a few one-off items that could well impact our 2020 accounts. Firstly, we've allowed £20,000 for the refurbishment of the chairs in church. Then there's a baptism pool that we've purchased for around £2,000. And there's some planned expenditure in the church centre for an office window and also LED lighting. We'll probably need to spend about £7,000 on the heating system again, but this more or less equates to last year's expenditure, so I've not shown it here as a change. The reduction in giving combined with these one-off expenditures should be sufficient to turn a £5,000 surplus into a £30,000 deficit. This might sound slightly alarming, but can I refer you back to our general reserves figure? Even if we do generate a £30,000 deficit this year, we'll still be left with reserves of nearly £90,000. I've not mentioned costs for a youth worker. This is because when an appointment is made, we'll be able to access increased grant funding from the Cooper and Jordan Trust, and together with the pledges that have been made, the combined additional income should pretty much offset the cost of employment. Though obviously there is now some doubt as to the likely date of this important appointment. That's what we budgeted. How is the reality measuring up to the budget? Well, this slide shows our financial position after the first 5 months of this year. Looking at income first, giving was behind budget by £12,800 for the first 5 months at £81,400. The full effect of the lockdown on giving seems to be a reduction of around £4,000 to £5,000 per month. Standing order income has held up reasonably well, but envelope giving has stopped completely and plate giving is very much reduced. I've classified one-off giving into the current account as plate. And this shows in graph form the decline in our giving levels over the past 12 months. Our giving had been in gradual decline since August last year, but unsurprisingly, the effect of the lockdown has been to increase the rate of this decline. Thank you to those of you who've contacted me regarding alternative arrangements for giving during this period. If you normally give via envelopes or by plate, but would like to consider alternative means while the church remains closed, please note that there are links on the APC website that enable you to either make regular or one-off gifts to the church. Okay, returning to this slide, we can see that other income was £4,300 behind budget for the 5 months at £20,000. This was largely because there was no higher income in April or May, an adverse deficit of almost £4,000 against budget. Quickly looking at expenditure, mission giving was on budget at £12,000. Lay worker costs for the 5 months came in at £5,800 less than budget at just over £17,000. The budget assumes a youth worker is employed from September, so we'd expect an underspend in the earlier part of the year. Church costs were £6,100 under budget at £16,700. Repairs and renewal costs came well under budget with only £3,500 spent year to date out of a budget of £30,000. Remember, in here we'd budgeted for chair reupholstering. Many church costs like light and heat, verger costs, repairs and general costs have all reduced substantially during the lockdown period. And since the budget was set, we've learned that considerable expenditure will have to be made to repair our church roof. Costs for this are still being finalised, but could be in the region of £40,000 to £50,000, and obviously that's going to substantially alter our finances for the year. Parish share costs were on budget at £35,200, and we're paid up to date with the diocese. Church centre costs at £8,800 under budget came in at £11,100. None of the budgeted costs for heating repairs, lighting upgrades and a new office window have yet to be made. Cleaning costs for Tina and Julie will be reimbursed through the job retention scheme, and Chris is not currently submitting management claims. Events and activities income and expenditure more or less balanced each other out during the first part of the year, with a small net spend of £295. There have been, unsurprisingly, virtually no transactions during the past 3 months. Management and admin costs of £11,300 were also under budget by £2,900. So the deficit for the 5 months of £2,700 was better than the budgeted deficit of £12,400 by nearly £10,000. We've already mentioned the budget contains a number of one-off expenditure items, none of which have been spent, so the relatively small size of the year-to-date deficit is perhaps unsurprising. The current reduction in income of around £6,000 to £7,000 a month is being offset to a reasonable extent by cost reductions. Nevertheless, it remains a possibility that the deficit will increase while the lockdown continues. So challenges lie ahead, but we were fortunate to go into 2020 with significant reserves, meaning that we have no immediate financial concerns. We have a good God, and whatever the future holds for the local church here in Aldridge, we will continue to trust him for the financial provision to enable us to carry out the work as he directs. Thank you.